The perfect family. Michael Hayden had built his life on appearances. To the neighbors in Oakbrook Heights, he was the picture of suburban success. A handsome man in his late 30s, sharp suits for work, khakis and polos for backyard barbecues. He had a steady job as a financial consultant, a wife who taught English literature at the community college, and a 15-year-old daughter who made honor roll and played soccer. The Haydens looked like the kind of family you'd see in a glossy brochure for small-town America. On Friday evenings, Michael grilled steaks on the patio, sipping a cold beer while Sarah set the table and Emily scrolled through her phone, pretending not to laugh at her father's terrible jokes. On Sunday mornings they attended church, always sitting in the same pew, always smiling at the same families. Their world was neat, orderly, predictable. But appearances were fragile things. And Michael knew better than anyone how easily they could crack. It was close to midnight when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah stirred beside him, murmuring in her sleep, but didn't wake. The soft glow of the screen illuminated a name Michael never wanted his wife to see. Vincent Carlo. Michael's pulse quickened. He slipped out of bed with the practiced ease of a man who'd done it many times before. In the bathroom with the door closed, he answered in a low voice. Yeah. Pause. A voice like gravel grinding on glass. You're late on the numbers. Tomorrow morning. My place. I'll have it ready, Michael said, his throat dry. You'd better. Don't make me doubt you. The line went dead. Michael stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Same blue eyes. Same faint smile lines at the corners. Same face Sarah kissed goodnight. Only he knew the truth. The man in the mirror was a mask. He dressed quietly, moving like a shadow through the darkened house. His leather briefcase, packed earlier in the week, waited by the garage door. He opened it once, making sure the files were there, the false invoices and offshore transfers hidden in plain spreadsheets. As he backed the car out of the driveway, the house seemed to watch him. A tidy brick colonial, porch light glowing warmly, a flag stirring in the soft wind. Inside, Sarah and Emily slept, safe in the cocoon of suburban normalcy. They had no idea he was driving into a different world, one where money was laundered, lives were bargained, and mistakes were paid for in blood. Downtown Chicago was a different animal at night. Steel towers loomed like sentinels, glass catching the city's glow. Michael parked in a dim garage 3 blocks from Carlo's condo and walked fast, head down. He passed men who looked through him, women who eyed his suit and knew he didn't belong. Carlo's building was modern, sleek and guarded. The doorman didn't even glance at Michael, just buzzed him in. Upstairs, the penthouse smelled of leather, cigars and expensive cologne. Vincent Carlo waited in the living room, lounging on a black sofa, his thick arms resting on the back like a king on his throne. 2 of his men stood nearby, silent and watchful. You're late, Carlo said. Michael forced a smile. Traffic. Carlo's eyes, dark and predatory, didn't blink. Show me. Michael laid out the files, his fingers steady despite the hammering of his heart. He explained the transfers, the shell accounts in the Caymans, the clean money that would flow back into Carlo's real estate holdings. The numbers were good, flawless in fact. That was Michael's gift. When he finished, silence stretched. Then Carlo smiled, a slow curl of his lips. You're a magician, Hayden. Turning dirt into gold. Relief washed through Michael, but he kept his face neutral. Praise from Carlo was always double-edged. Don't get comfortable, Carlo added. Comfort makes men sloppy. And sloppy men don't last. Michael nodded. He knew the rules. One mistake and there'd be no second chances. By the time he slipped back into his house, dawn was just brushing the horizon. He undressed quietly, sliding under the covers beside Sarah, who stirred and murmured something he didn't catch. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe evenly, like a man who had never left. Tomorrow morning they would eat pancakes together. He would kiss Sarah before work, wave to Emily as she headed for school. The picture of a perfect family. But behind the picture, shadows moved. And Michael Hayden knew it was only a matter of time before the shadows caught up. Secret deals. The Monday morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, filling the Haydens' home with warmth and light. Sarah poured coffee into Michael's favorite mug, the one with the Cubs logo, while Emily rummaged through her backpack, muttering about a missing notebook. It was the kind of ordinary chaos that made their lives feel stable, unremarkable, safe. Michael smiled and played his role with precision. He ruffled Emily's hair as she darted out the door for school. He kissed Sarah on the cheek, lingering just long enough to feel the guilt settle deep in his stomach. I'll be home early tonight, he promised. Sarah gave him a look, skeptical but too tired to press. We'll see. He left the house with his briefcase in hand, but his real office for the day wasn't the consulting firm downtown. Not exactly. His colleagues thought he was a financial wizard, a man with uncanny instincts for investments and markets. They had no idea half of his accounts were phantom clients, shell corporations tied to men like Vincent Carlo. At his desk, Michael stared at his computer screen. To anyone walking by, it looked like he was analyzing client portfolios. In reality, he was running a sophisticated laundering scheme, taking dirty money from Carlo's gambling operations, funneling it through a maze of accounts, and spitting it back out as legitimate profits. He worked with clinical precision, double and triple checking every number. If a decimal slipped, if a transfer landed in the wrong place, he wouldn't just lose his job. He would lose everything. By noon, he had $3 million moving quietly through his system. By evening, it would appear as profits from a chain of car washes in Nevada and a construction firm in Arizona, both controlled by Carlo. Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had built his second life on control. Numbers never lied. People did. That evening, Sarah noticed he was quieter than usual at dinner. She talked about grading papers, Emily complained about her coach, but Michael barely heard them. His mind replayed Carlo's warning, comfort makes men sloppy. Later, after Emily went upstairs, Sarah lingered at the table, studying him. "You've been distracted," she said softly. Michael forced a smile. "Just work. You always say that." "It's true." Sarah tilted her head as though trying to see past his mask. "Are you keeping something from me?" For a moment, Michael's breath caught. The room seemed too still, the air too heavy. He reached across the table, took her hand. "I would never lie to you," he said. The words were smooth, practiced. They came easily, too easily. Sarah searched his eyes but finally nodded, letting it drop. He exhaled, the relief mixed with shame. The next night, Carlo's men came for him. 2 black SUVs idled outside his office building. Michael's stomach twisted when he saw them. He got in without a word, the tinted windows swallowing him whole. They drove in silence, through the city and into an industrial district by the river. The warehouse loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and shadows. Inside, the air smelled of oil and concrete. Carlo waited on a raised platform, a cigar glowing between his fingers. "You did good," Carlo said, smoke curling from his lips. "The money's moving smooth. But I need more." Michael swallowed. "More?" "5 million next month. 10 if you can handle it." That's a big jump." Carlo leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're my guy, Hayden. You make problems disappear. Don't tell me you're nervous." Michael forced a calm smile. "I can handle it." Carlo's grin was sharp, predatory. "That's what I like to hear." But Michael's chest tightened. 5 million wasn't just numbers. It was more exposure, more risk, more eyes on him. And in the world he lived in, too much attention could be fatal. Back home, Sarah lay awake as Michael slipped into bed well past midnight. She pretended to sleep, her breathing slow and steady. But her mind churned. Receipts she didn't recognize. Late-night absences. That strange tension in his eyes when she asked simple questions. Michael whispered, "I love you," as he wrapped an arm around her. Sarah's eyes stayed closed. She wanted to believe him. She needed to. But deep down, a seed of doubt had already been planted. And once doubt takes root, it doesn't let go. The next morning, Michael sat in his office, staring at spreadsheets that blurred before his eyes. His phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID didn't say Carlo. It said unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A calm, measured voice spoke. "Mr. Hayden, we should talk. You don't know me, but I know you. And I know what you've been doing." Michael froze. His stomach dropped like a stone. The voice continued, "Don't hang up. This isn't a threat. Not yet. Consider it a warning." The line went dead. Michael sat in silence, sweat beading on his forehead. His double life was no longer just his secret. Someone else knew. And secrets in his world had a way of killing people. First suspicions. Sarah Hayden stood at the sink, staring at the window above it, though her mind was miles away. She hadn't slept well in weeks. Michael was different. He smiled less, came home late more often, and sometimes when he touched her, she felt as if his hands were there but his mind was somewhere else entirely. She wanted to believe it was just stress from work. She wanted to believe him when he said he was fine. But Sarah had been married to Michael for almost 16 years, and she knew the rhythm of his moods, the cadence of his lies and truths. Something didn't add up. When she went to tidy his home office that morning, the unease deepened. The desk was spotless, almost unnaturally so. Michael wasn't messy by nature, but he always left little signs of life. A stray paperclip, a pen uncapped, coffee rings on the wood. Now it looked scrubbed, staged. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of tax files, she found an envelope. Inside were receipts, restaurants and bars downtown, hotels with names she didn't recognize. The dates lined up with nights he'd come home late. Her first thought was an affair. The cliché explanation. But the charges were odd. Huge tabs for dinners, bar bills that ran into the hundreds, valet parking in neighborhoods Michael never mentioned. Sarah pressed the receipts to her chest and sat down at his desk. If he was lying, she needed to know why. Meanwhile, Emily was riding the city bus home from school. She preferred it to carpooling. It gave her space to breathe, headphones on, the city sliding past her window. That day the bus paused at a red light near a hotel downtown. Emily wasn't paying attention until she spotted a familiar figure on the sidewalk. Her father. He was dressed sharply, suit pressed, tie knotted perfectly. But he wasn't alone. Two men in dark jackets flanked him. They weren't laughing, weren't chatting like colleagues. They walked with purpose, their eyes scanning the street like bodyguards. Emily pulled out her earbuds, staring. Her dad didn't see her. He climbed into a black SUV with tinted windows and the car pulled away. Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell herself it was nothing, maybe business partners, maybe friends. But deep down she felt it, something was wrong. When she got home she didn't say anything. Not to her mom, not to her dad. But the image replayed in her mind all evening, burning itself into memory. That night, at dinner, the tension at the table was quiet but heavy. Sarah pushed her salad around with her fork, Emily pretended to be absorbed in her phone, and Michael told a story about a client as though reading from a script. "Work's been crazy," he said, laughing a little too loudly. "Where exactly is work these days?" Sarah asked suddenly. Her eyes were steady on him. Michael froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a smile. "Downtown, same as always." "Funny," Sarah said, her tone light but sharp. "I could have sworn I saw a charge for the Grand Regent Hotel last week." Michael's fork clattered against his plate. For a moment his mask slipped. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "A client meeting. Some people like fancy venues. You know how it is." Sarah didn't press, but Emily noticed the way her mother's jaw tightened, the way her father's smile didn't reach his eyes. Later, Michael sat alone in his office at home, the glow of the desk lamp highlighting his weary face. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages. The unknown caller hadn't contacted him again, but the silence felt worse than the warning itself. Whoever that voice belonged to, they knew. His chest ached with the weight of two worlds. To his wife and daughter, he was the steady anchor of their lives. To Carlo, he was the numbers man, the magician who turned crime into profit. And somewhere in the shadows, another presence was watching, waiting. Sarah lingered in the doorway. "You working late again?" Michael forced a smile. "Yeah. Just trying to keep up." She crossed her arms, leaning on the doorframe. "You know, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we take a trip. Just the three of us. No work, no phones. Remember how we used to drive out to the lake in the summers?" The suggestion stabbed at him. He wanted to say yes, to imagine himself free of it all, eating ice cream on the boardwalk with Sarah and Emily, laughing like he used to. But freedom was an illusion. Carlo owned him. "Maybe soon," he said softly. "Things are just busy right now." Sarah studied him, searching for cracks in the mask. "Busy?" she echoed. Her voice was flat. Emily lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. She replayed what she'd seen on the street. Her father with those men, the black SUV, the way he didn't look happy, didn't look safe. She picked up her phone, thought about telling her best friend, thought about texting her mom. But something held her back. It wasn't just fear. It was confusion, disbelief. Her father wasn't the kind of man who kept secrets. He wasn't the kind of man who needed bodyguards. He was just that. But what if that wasn't true anymore? The next morning, Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at the envelope of receipts she'd hidden back in Michael's drawer. She thought about confronting him outright, about slamming them down on the table and demanding the truth. But part of her was afraid of what she'd hear. Secrets have a smell, a weight. And in the Hayden house, Sarah could feel them pressing in, silent but suffocating. She poured her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Across the room, Michael kissed Emily on the head and grabbed his briefcase like always. "Love you," he said. Sarah forced a smile. "Love you too." But the words tasted different now. Because love without trust was nothing more than a performance. And Sarah was no longer sure what part of their life was real, and what part was just an act. The undercover agent. Jonathan Cross had spent 20 years in the bureau, and he'd learned one unshakable truth. Criminals always believed their secrets were safe. They thought they were clever, invisible. They never considered that the walls had ears, or that the numbers they trusted so completely could turn into shackles. And Michael Hayden was no exception. Cross sat in his unmarked sedan across from Hayden's downtown office, sipping cold coffee, eyes on the glass facade. He'd been following the money for months: casino schemes, offshore transfers, shell corporations with paper-thin histories. Each thread led back to one man, Vincent Carlo. But the numbers didn't move themselves. Someone was laundering them with a skill that impressed even Cross. That someone was Michael Hayden, suburban father of one, husband, neighbor, churchgoer. Cross had seen this kind of man before. Clean on the outside, rotten underneath. Sometimes they were the hardest to crack because they'd built their entire identity around the lie. But everyone had a weak spot. And for Michael Hayden, it wasn't greed. It was family. That afternoon, Cross attended Emily Hayden's soccer game. Not as an agent, but as a neighbor. He wore jeans, a Cubs cap, and carried a folding chair like any other parent. He made small talk with the moms on the sidelines, his cover story rehearsed. Single father, recently moved to Oakbrook Heights with his teenage son. Sarah sat a few chairs down, cheering when Emily made a good play. Cross eased his way into the conversation naturally. "Which one's yours?" Sarah asked politely. He nodded toward the field. "Number 12. Tyler. He's got no left foot, but he hustles." Sarah smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I'm Sarah. My daughter's 15, number 9. Emily, right?" "She's good," Cross said smoothly, as though he hadn't already memorized her name from weeks of surveillance. They chatted about school, traffic, the weather. Cross was careful, just enough charm to seem friendly, not enough to raise suspicion. But behind his casual smile, he was studying Sarah closely. The tired eyes, the way she laughed politely but glanced at her phone every few minutes. She was distracted, burdened. He wondered if she knew. That evening, after the game, Sarah sat in the bleachers waiting for Emily to finish changing. Cross strolled past, pausing as though on impulse. "You know, some of the parents are planning a carpool for practices. If you're interested, I can give you my number." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "That would actually help. My husband's been busy." Cross handed her a slip of paper with his cover phone. "No problem. Always easier when we share the load." She tucked the number into her bag, grateful but distracted. Cross noted the subtle edge in her voice when she'd mentioned her husband. Cracks in the armor. Later, when Sarah drove home with Emily, she caught herself thinking about the stranger at the game. Friendly. Normal. Safe. Safe. The very thing she hadn't felt with Michael in a long time. Meanwhile, Michael was with Carlo in a dimly lit restaurant on the north side. The kind of place where every table was private, every waiter knew when to look away. Carlo leaned forward, his heavy hands gripping a glass of scotch. "Word is, the feds are sniffing around. You hear anything?" Michael forced calm into his voice. "Not a thing. If they were close, I'd know." Carlo studied him with a predator's patience. "See that you do. I don't like surprises." Michael nodded, but his stomach churned. The irony was unbearable. The feds were close. He could feel it like a shadow crawling behind him. When he finally returned home, Sarah was already in bed, her back to him. He slid under the covers, staring at the ceiling. His double life was getting heavier, harder to balance. And he knew deep down that he couldn't keep it up forever. The next day, Cross filed his report. Subject: Michael Hayden. Status: active surveillance. Recommendation: infiltration through family contact. His supervisor frowned. "You think the wife will crack?" Cross shrugged. "She already suspects something. All it takes is one push. She'll either confront him or confide in the wrong person. Either way, we get leverage." "And the daughter?" "Teenagers notice more than parents think. She's watching him. If she talks, we'll know." The supervisor nodded. "Be careful, Cross. Carlos people won't hesitate to put a bullet in a suburban dad if they think he's compromised. And if Hayden's smart, he might smell you coming." Cross allowed himself a thin smile. "That's the thing. Guys like Hayden, they're already drowning. All I have to do is hand them the rope." That weekend, Sarah bumped into Cross again at the grocery store. It felt like coincidence, though of course it wasn't. He reached for the same carton of milk, chuckled, and said, "Small world." Sarah laughed, the sound surprising even her. They talked in line, light conversation, nothing meaningful. But when he asked, "So, what does your husband do?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "He's in finance," she said finally. Cross raised an eyebrow just slightly. "Must keep him busy." Very, she said, her voice flat. Cross filed away the hesitation, the way her gaze drifted, the way her smile faltered. Sarah Hayden didn't know it yet, but she was already part of his case. That night, Emily sat at her desk, pretending to do homework. She scrolled through her phone instead, her mind elsewhere. She hadn't told anyone about what she'd seen downtown. Not her mom, not her friends. But the secret was eating at her. Her father wasn't who he seemed to be. And now, a strange new man had appeared in their lives, friendly and charming. Emily didn't know it, but the walls were closing in. Because in Oakbrook Heights, the perfect family next door was about to become the center of a storm. And Jonathan Cross was the one stirring it. The split. Michael Hayden had always thought of himself as two men, the husband and father his neighbors saw, and the ghost who slipped through Chicago's underworld at night. Until recently he'd managed to keep those two halves separate, neatly walled off. But walls had cracks and cracks grew. Lately the cracks were spreading faster than he could patch them. At breakfast, Emily asked if he could come to her next soccer game. It's a big one, Dad. Playoffs. Michael smiled, but his chest tightened. I'll try, sweetheart. Work's crazy. Her face fell just slightly. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, which was worse. He wanted to promise, wanted to swear he'd be there no matter what. But he couldn't. Not with Carlo demanding weekly meetings, not with an anonymous caller breathing down his neck. Across the table, Sarah studied him over her coffee mug. Her silence was louder than any question. That night, Michael sat in Carlo's penthouse, pretending to listen as the boss outlined new real estate acquisitions. His eyes drifted to the city lights beyond the window, glittering like stars. From this height, the city looked peaceful, beautiful. But Michael knew better. He was part of the machinery that kept it dirty. Hayden, Carlo's voice snapped him back. You listening? Yeah, Michael said quickly. Of course. Carlo leaned forward, suspicion flickering in his eyes. You're distracted lately. Don't let me regret trusting you. Michael forced himself to sit straighter, to summon the confidence he no longer felt. I'm solid, Vincent. You know that. Carlo studied him for a long moment before grunting. See that you are. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Michael kept his answers sharp, his posture steady. But inside he felt like a tightrope walker in a storm, the rope swaying beneath his feet. Back in Oakbrook Heights, Sarah was grading essays when her phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number. Hey, this is Jonathan. From the soccer game. Just wanted to share the carpool schedule. Attached was a simple spreadsheet. She smiled despite herself. It was a small kindness, but it stood out against the cloud hanging over her home. She typed back, thanks. That really helps. Within minutes he replied, no problem. Always easier when people look out for each other. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart oddly heavy. She thought about showing Michael, then closed the phone instead. He didn't need to know. Emily wasn't sleeping well. She lay awake most nights, replaying the image of her father climbing into that black SUV. Every time she tried to convince herself she'd imagined it, the memory sharpened, undeniable. One afternoon, while Michael was at work, she wandered into his home office. She wasn't snooping, not at first. But when she opened his desk drawer to borrow a pen, she found the envelope of receipts. Hotel bills. Expensive dinners. Dates that matched his late nights. Emily's chest tightened. She shoved the papers back, but the truth gnawed at her. Was her father cheating? Was that why he seemed so distant, so tired all the time? She wanted to ask him, but fear kept her silent. What if he lied? What if he told her something that broke the fragile image she still clung to? Instead, she carried the secret with her, just as Sarah carried hers. Michael noticed the changes. Sarah's laughter was rarer now, Emily's hugs less frequent. His family was slipping from him, and he couldn't tell them why. He couldn't confess that every day he was laundering millions for a man who would slit his throat without hesitation. He couldn't tell them about the phone call, the faceless voice that knew his secret. So he smiled harder, tried to act lighter. But the harder he worked at being normal, the faker it felt. At church on Sunday, he shook hands with neighbors, complimented the pastor's sermon, pretended everything was fine. But as he sat in the pew, Emily beside him, Sarah on the other side, Michael's mind was elsewhere. He imagined the agents who might already be watching. The informants who might be whispering to Carlo. The walls closing in from both sides. He squeezed Emily's hand, forcing a smile when she glanced at him. For a moment he almost believed it. Almost. Monday evening, Sarah decided to test him. She set dinner on the table, waited until Emily went upstairs to shower, then slid the envelope of receipts across to him. Michael froze. Want to tell me what these are? Sarah's voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. His mind raced. An affair would almost be easier to admit. The truth was worse, far worse. Their business, he said finally, steadying his voice. Clients. Meetings downtown. You know how it is. I don't, Sarah said flatly. Because you don't tell me any more. Silence stretched between them. Michael reached for her hand, but she pulled back. Sarah, I swear. Don't, she snapped, then lowered her voice. Don't swear to me if it's a lie. Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything. But to drag her into his darkness would mean destroying her too. I love you, he said instead. It sounded hollow even to him. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then stood and left the room without another word. Michael sat alone, the envelope between them like a bomb. That night, as Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed again. A simple text from Jonathan. How's your week going? She hesitated, then typed. Complicated. He didn't press. Just sent back. If you ever need to talk, I'm around. Sarah closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Not yet. But the fact that she wanted to reply, wanted to confide in a stranger, told her everything she needed to know. Her marriage was breaking. And she didn't know if she wanted to fix it anymore. Down the hall, Michael sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. He wasn't working. He was thinking. About the anonymous call. About Carlo's growing suspicion. About Sarah's questions and Emily's watchful eyes. He felt the split inside him widening, the husband and father pulling away from the criminal he had become. He couldn't hold both lives together forever. And soon he would have to choose which one to let go.